All right, well, I'm going to give everyone a few moments to get settled here before we begin. Okay, well, hello and welcome everyone to How to Improve Collections panel hosted by the Canadian Lenders Association. We have a wonderful group of panelists today and a really great discussion moderated by Brian Semenier, president of Canaseed Financial Group. Brian's going to take us through a panel discussion and then we will open the floor up to questions. So if you do have a question, feel free to submit them at any time. There's a Q&A box at the bottom there, and then we'll make sure to try to get to them after the discussion. And of course, this panel is also being recorded and will be emailed out to all of you afterwards. But without any further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Brian, to get the discussion started.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. It's a pleasure to see everybody here today, those people who are here on the panel, as well as I know that there's a lot of people out there in cyberspace who have been able to join us. I'm very excited about this. Ultimately, my job in this exercise has been made very easy by the panelists that have been invited on today. Largely, I get the enviable position of having to ask only questions and have no answers because they have far more knowledge than I on any of these related topics. There's an old saying in lending, which is that it's easy to give money away. It's a lot harder to get that money back. And so we're going to talk today about what is necessary in today's day and age to improve collections. As everybody on in the audience and on the panel would know, having an efficient and scalable collection strategy is a really critical part of any lending business, and it's something that increasingly is the focus for capital providers, regulators, and even customers to make sure that they know who it is they're partnering with on the other side. It's also an exciting time because unlike days of past, to have a really efficient, optimized recovery and customer management strategy does not require the same type of scale that used to only be reserved for enterprise grade banks and international lenders. You can achieve a lot of that with the right structures, the right setup, and the right system. So it's an important and exciting time to be working in the industry, and a lot has changed over the past even just 2 years, let alone the past 10 years. Before we begin, I am going to turn things over to members of the panel to introduce themselves. They'll do a better job of that than I would. So I'm going to turn things over to Amir to start, and then we'll work our way around the room. So Amir, over to you.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Amir. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Lexop. We're a Montreal-based fintech, and our software is used by financial institutions, telcos, and utilities to improve their collection experience, their collection process, to be more flexible with consumers that are past due. In a previous life, I used to be a banking and bankruptcy lawyer for about 8 years, and I do every time. I apologize to everyone for that. Nobody's perfect. And today I am 100% a fintech CEO. So that's that.
And Colin, over to you. Oh, and you're just the phrase of 2020 and 2021.
You're muted.
You're on mute. Yeah.
Thanks, Brian. And welcome, everyone. Thanks for spending some time with us today. My name is Colin Chisholm. I am the Chief Collections Officer for Merchant Growth. Merchant Growth is a Canadian company based in British Columbia, and we support through financing small and medium-sized enterprises from coast to coast to coast. We are incredibly successful. We've had a great capital raise round that we've just closed. We've got a lot of exciting new products that we're coming to market with, and we want to help small and medium-sized businesses succeed. That's our job. That's what we're here for. Give us a call.
Thank you, Colin. And alphabetically, David, over to you.
Great, thank you. Hey, folks, David Nathanson. I am with Cement. Cement is a software as a service platform built to engage customers digitally across a variety of customer use cases. One of those use cases is collections, and we deliver behavioral-backed content to consumers across a variety of verticals. So we are in traditional banking, alternative lending, utilities, etc. So we're out of Calgary, Canada, and just happy to be here speaking with you today.
Thank you, David. And finally, but not last, Jeff, on to our best dressed panelist today. So on to you.
Yes, let the banker in us flow through. Hi, my name is Jeff Pilo. I work for Auto Capital Canada. We do subprime lending for automobiles, also consumer loans. I'm the Vice President of Servicing Operations, so I run the collections, customer servicing. We refer to it as the repayment servicing, not collections. We also do some servicing work for one of the major banks in Canada for repo and remarketing, as well as other servicing for other financial institutions for collections and repo and remarketing.
Great, thank you, everyone. So that sort of introduces the panel. We're going to kick it off today. We have a series of questions that we've prepared. If there are items that people do have, as was mentioned, please send those over as well. We'll monitor those over Q&A. But we're going to start with a fairly generic comment and just sort of ask out to the panel to see what are kind of the distinguishing factors that you feel separate good collection strategies from great collection strategies. And again, because you have the highest name in the alphabet, Amir, I'm going to go to you first, and then others, please feel free to add on as necessary. Oh, and again, on mute. Yeah.
Yeah, that was sneaky, Brian. You muted me as a host. I'm not used to that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Good to great. I think first thing I'd mention is that great doesn't mean perfect. There's no perfect way of collecting and engaging. But one thing we have noticed, and we're a software, right? So we did a recent survey this year with over 4,000 respondents, Canadian and Americans, asking that same question. And although they were engaged via digital channels, they'd received a personalized message that was in the right tone and it was tailored to them. When we asked the question, so what would have made the experience even better? They answered, well, we would have loved to be able to make a payment agreement without talking to anyone, right? So it kind of portrays how whatever you offer, there's always one step further that you could have gone to make it absolutely great. On our end, what we noticed is that recently, especially with government stimulus that is ending, payment agreement is a hot topic right now. To be able to, without having to talking to an agent on the phone for an hour, to be able to decide or be empowered to decide your frequency and duration, how you want to repay directly on your phone at your fingertips. This is what we're noticing is a hot topic and something that is very appealing to consumers right now.
Just to add to that, if I could, I think similar to what Amir's saying, how I look at it is from a KPI is contact rate, and contact rate has evolved over the years as more of an omni-channel experience where you're looking at email, text, phone, all these different ways that if you can increase your contact rate, that usually leads to better results, and that's in the end is what we're trying to strive for.
Yeah, I would jump in and just add a couple of quick things. So I think to your point, Jeff, like right channel, right message, right time, like all that is important. And these days, like that's kind of table stakes, right, to drive a collections operation. So I think that's really important. I think the other piece that's important is in doing that. So right channel, right message, right time is understanding the customer themselves and having kind of right tone and right call to action so that you drive them towards the appropriate outcome in a way that is kind of transparent to them, but yields the outcome that you want as a collections organization.
I would also add that you want to make sure that you always begin the credit process with the end in mind. And to do that, you want to take the simple steps that you can take in the very beginning of the process, the application process, if you will, to make sure that you're giving yourself an opportunity to be successful in the unlikely event something does go wrong down the road. Two quick things that you want to do. You want to make sure that your customers are giving you the right to pull their credit reports for as long as they have an obligation outstanding to you. You want to have that in your applications. And you want to make sure in your agreements that you have a small paragraph that the customer understands they have the opportunity to seek independent legal advice on the contract and their roles, rights, and responsibility therein. Two small things that can make the job for collections much, much easier down the road.
I would just, echo that, point that Colin's made. And this is something we were going to touch on a lot later, but, bring forward a little bit, is that the whole cycle, or the life cycle for the consumer, is a lot more integrated than it used to be. It's no longer distinctly collections and origination. There's much more connection between how an account is originated and how an account is collected. And the old saying, an account well sold is an account half collected, I think still is true today. But it's even more important in that the way in which you're originating an account, I shouldn't be giving too many comments here, but the way in which you're originating an account is not the same sort of in-branch handshake that it used to be. It's now all about multi-channel differentiation, giving the customer the way that they want to not only pay their account, but book their account in the first place. So I would generally say that the bar has moved as to what customers expect from us in the service standard that we supply to them. And that standard of table space, to David's point, is no longer simply just being able to walk into a bank and make a payment. They need a lot more, and they want to be able to engage with you in a lot more ways than just, here's my bank account information, go in and tell your teller deposit to this account. And that sort of, is going to kind of moves into another question we were going to ask, which is just on a company then with smaller resources, or a company that doesn't have enterprise grade resources, what is it then that they should be doing? So it's great to say that these are the standards and the customer, the bar is raised, but what should a company do in order to try and actually deliver on that expectation from the customer? So I'll throw it out to the group if anyone wants to start there.
Yeah, I'll jump in quickly. Like, I think this is important, and Amir, like, you might have a similar opinion, right? We both work for startups now, right? And so I think for smaller organizations that are starting out and starting their operations, right, trying to build everything yourself is a monumental task, right? I know that from where I work now. Like, we don't build what we're not experts at. We look to partners and onboard those partners to provide those services for us across the board. And I think the same is true in a collections environment, right? Like, there are things organizationally that you'll be good at, and there's things that you should know that you're not experts in. And for those things where you're not experts, you should look to the experts to provide those things for you. That's one thing I would suggest.
Definitely. I mean, if you have the resources and the team to do your own customer segmentation, then good, perfect, right? You can see their risk, their credit score, and you can segment based on where they live, the demographics. But if you don't do that, there are tools out there that help you with segmentation. If you don't have the capacity to engage all your client base via digital channels with your current infrastructure, there are tools out there as well. So I would say kind of like divide and conquer would be the best approach in terms of being able to cast a wide net and get as much collection as possible.
Great. And we've received a question. I think, Colin, this is something kind of in reaction to a comment you made. So the question is, should the customer be in control of the payment option that they like versus what they agreed to if they prefer not to speak to anybody? So how is it that you would change your payment channel if a customer has already agreed to something, but now they want to change that, but they don't want to talk to you about it?
I'm going to hand this one off to my colleague Amir, because this is exactly what he was talking about in the software solutions that could drive that.
Well, actually, we out of all of our clients, we work mostly with mid-market to enterprise. None of them want the customer to be able to modify willingly at their own discretion a payment agreement that has been agreed to. Now, they have the initial ability to frame a payment arrangement, frame it within a threshold that has been allowed to them. But once that's made, the objective is not to allow the person to change it at their own discretion, but rather to allow them to make that initial agreement. And if there's any change to be made, they can call and say, can you change it? And then the creditor in this case will have the ability via the software they have to make that change easily via their dashboard or their payment agreement dashboard that they have. So I guess there's a distinction to make there. It's not to allow them to change it as it goes, but to make an original agreement that is tailored to their needs, then they stick to it.
Now, it's a good point. I think the other thing too that's helpful is during the course of these agreements, right? Like, because some of these payments could wind up being multi-payment arrangements, right? That extend over a period of time. And one thing that's important to potentially prevent changes, but also to address any as they might come up proactively, is to remain in communication with the individual over the duration of that agreement effectively, so that you are providing the right kind of nurture contents, etc., to drive them towards a successful fulfillment of what they agreed to and to address any changes that they might need to make.
Yeah, and I think as well that this to me highlights another point, which is that there isn't one type of collections. There are various stages of collection that you would have with the consumer, and certainly if you've engaged in with a contract where the consumer has said, I would like to, or we touched on a little bit, the borrower in general, doesn't have to be a consumer, but has said, I will use this payment channel, and they're fulfilling their obligations to you, then you are obligated to fulfill your obligations to them. But then there's early stage delinquency, there's mid stage delinquency, there's late stage delinquency. And at that point, the payment channels that were originally agreed upon are no longer really sort of the rules of the game. And now you've got a different form of engagement with that consumer on the other side. So how is it that you would differentiate, and do you make distinctions between these types of delinquency, or are they all treated fairly homogeneously? Maybe Jeff, put that question out to you first.
Thanks. Yeah, for us, because we collect our own and other people's. For us, the most important is obviously the early stage. The old adage, the best way not to have to collect your 90s is not to have any. So we make sure that we have the most contact strategies, the most solutions, the strongest collectors at the front, so that we can mitigate the amount that rolls into the next buckets. It's not to say that we don't have the same treatments and same efforts at the end of the life cycle near the 90 plus and so forth. But we also look at trying to resolve the account as soon as possible. A lot of probing questions, identifying what the issue is, and making sure it matches the right solution. And doing a triage to determine a can't pay versus a won't pay. If it's a can't pay, we look at solutions to try to get them on track. If it's a won't pay, if they have the ability, usually litigation is a very useful tool on those situations. But yeah, I'll see if anybody else wants to add to that.
I would absolutely agree that in the beginning, the key is to establish contact through whatever channel is going to work. So focus on using every piece of contact information you have with that client. You need to get their attention as quickly as you can so you can deal with the issue forthrightly. If, however, things don't happen quickly, if things take a while, and if you're able through a wallet biopsy to determine that this person has the ability to pay but won't, you should absolutely look at litigation as a potential solution, because there are powerful tools granted in this country to creditors who secure judgments. And that is something that I would encourage everyone to do. It's not necessarily cheap, and it's not necessarily easy, and it can take a very, very long time. But if you recover money that has been charged off, that money will flow directly to your bottom line, and it will make your CFO or your accountant a very, very happy person. So never give up, never surrender.
Well, and just while we've got both Colin and Jeff sort of specifically in the frame as well, Jeff, you have an additional component or dimension of your collections, which is for some of the verticals of your business, you have many, but for some of the verticals, you have security and collateral that's attached to those collections. How is it that security and collateral plays into your overall decision making on these accounts? Is it actually recovered? Is it behavioral? I mean, how do you think about it?
So it's an always moving target. So as an example, with everything that's been going on with the pandemic, most of our security are automobiles. And I don't know if everyone is aware, but the value of these automobiles have increased substantially due to the fact that supply and demand is really low, supply is really high. So we've taken a stance of looking at an opportunity where if a customer is saying they can no longer afford the car, they can't make their payments, we would look at a mitigation to try to keep them in the car, keep making payments, maybe doing partial write-downs, different mitigation tools, because a car is usually a depreciating asset. Things have changed significantly, and the car is now worth significantly more than it was originally. So we've come up with different tools where now when the customer says they no longer can afford the car, we've asked them if they've looked at selling it. And if they can't, then we are able to partner with some vendors where we can actively sell that car for the customer with the incentive of if there's any surplus funds, they'll get to keep it. So this mitigates from a cost perspective because it allows us to market the car, get the condition of the car, and try to sell it. And if we can't, we know what we have, and then we can take it, bring it to the auction and sell it. But it also brings for a better experience for the customer as well.
No, it's interesting the way you describe the sort of inversion of the collateral value, how that has changed the strategy. And I think it just emphasizes that, in this exercise, there is this sort of calculus that needs to be made, which is what is really going to be our sort of recovery given default on these accounts? What is our potential realizable value on this? And that is not a fixed point. Those things change dramatically over times. It's also important, I would highlight, I'll take sort of the empathetic side of this, is that particularly when you're working with customers where that car or that vehicle or whatever it is that you're working with is critical for them as an income earning potential, you've got to value balance, or at least we do in certain aspects. What impact are you having on the deficiency balance that you would be leaving over if you were to sell this car if the person can no longer remain employed? So it is a tough item in there. And ultimately, if a person needs their car in order to try and make their way to work, they generally will try and use that as a means in which to ensure that they make a payment. It used to be that the car was the most valuable product that people have. Now it's their cell phone. So if you're taking away somebody's cell phone, or if they don't make a payment, then suddenly you've got really the real kind of golden standard there. But it's really changed just over the past couple of years.
Agreed. We need to be agile. I mean, I completely agree from when you look at Cs and SU provinces, definitely you can use it as a leverage. It's the Cs or SU provinces where the customers are very aware of the laws in their province. And we're just trying to find a way to try to mitigate our loss by mitigating the costs and getting them to sell the car. And the incentive being that it will give them the surplus funds. So it's been successful for us in those. But in Ontario, yes, I would completely agree that leveraging that, getting to work, because of the way we've gone from an urban and rural sort of, people need cars to get to work now. So yeah, definitely agree.
And Jeff, you've really just peaked to something else we didn't kind of discuss in advance, but the other important item in any collection strategy is knowing the regulatory environment in which you operate. So it is not one standard approach across Canada. Different provinces have different standards for statute of limitations, for collectability, for realization on security, and that should factor not just your collection strategy, but your origination strategy as well. So something else to keep in mind. I'm going to kind of kick, I guess, back into some of the questions we'd sort of discussed. The other one we were talking a little bit about, and I know people will be interested in, is what are now going to be the changes as the result of the past 2 years, COVID-19, and just the general effects of the pandemic on the way in which accounts are to be collected, both in the immediate term, which will come kind of as a result of some macroeconomic settling, as well as in the long term, which are the effects of a change in the way in which consumers are engaging in general. So maybe David, kick that one onto you to start.
Yeah, so I'll take the consumer piece initially there from the end. So it's interesting. So this fall, Cement actually released a study on the post-COVID environment where we did a lot of interviews with folks, did a lot of research specific to how consumers reacted to the kind of changing environment over the course of the pandemic. One thing that was really interesting was that consumers clearly over the course of the pandemic and now as we're coming out of it have and are turning more towards digital engagement methods, and they expect more digital engagement from all of it, whether it's their financial services providers, telco providers, whatever it may be. At the same time, those same group of people, when you talk to them, are also experiencing kind of digital fatigue, as it were. right? So they're tired of engaging digitally, and they have also at times said, like my payment rates may decrease if I only engage digitally, which is an interesting thing. So it's a little bit of a paradox. They expect to engage more digitally. They're also getting tired of engaging digitally. So it's kind of habituation, right? And so one of the things that I think will be a challenge for everybody from a business standpoint coming out of this environment is how do you thread that needle, right? Like, so how do you engage with consumers digitally, but do it in a way that doesn't cause kind of digital fatigue or habituation to the messages that you're sending out? And I think part of that is really understanding how to speak to them at an individual level with very hyper-personalized messages and being able to kind of do that and shift at scale. So it's very challenging, but it's going to be something that everybody has to address across the board.
Well, and I'm going to kind of interject as well. I do want to send it over to some other parties, but we did receive a question that I think is going to be a little open-ended, but it will be one that is notable, which is, what is the best type of communication to maximize collecting what is owed? And I think first you got to define best, but maybe just comment on that.
So if you're defining best as deriving the outcome that you want to derive, right, a payment in this case, for example, it's a terrible answer, but it depends, right? And often it's a combination of communication techniques. So it's not just SMS or just email or just phone. It's understanding through the gathering of data from prior interactions what the best cadence of multiple interactions is, right? Like, so Amir may respond very well to a phone call on day 1, a text message on day 3, followed by an email.
Never a phone call. Never.
Not for you. I'm just giving an example. Whereas somebody else may respond well to a very different cadence, right? And so you have to understand analytically for individuals with certain attributes and certain characteristics, you need to be able to project what the best cadence is, as well as what the best content is, along with what the offer is that they're going to react well to. So it's a complex problem. There are a variety of ways of solving that, both analytically and from a variety of different platform capabilities.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think they very quickly on this, David talked about the consumer perfectly, and I think how companies can prepare post-COVID. Brian, we actually spoke about this a year and a half ago together. During COVID,
we thought post-COVID would be a lot closer at the time, but yeah.
But during COVID, with the government aid, payments were good. We saw actually a peak of payments were actually online, on time. But I think when post-COVID, and especially now with the government stimulus ending, there's a massive backlog of receivables that are coming, past due receivables, right? So in terms of the consumer, David said it perfectly, but I think for the companies, what they could do, and I'm saying go digital, it's a big term, but by that I mean automate, right? Automate as much as possible the tasks related to collection, whether it's segmentation, whether it's outreach, whether it's payment facilitation, right? What you can do to tackle the post-COVID waves that are coming, it's automation, in my opinion, as well, of other things.
Yeah, ultimately, omni-channel management is not one channel to rule them all, right? There isn't one super channel. It's a television station, but it's not the super channel. Ultimately, the best channel is going to be whatever channel that consumer wants to engage with you on in that moment, and that is not an easy thing to define. But the trick to try and figure it out is either ask the consumer or go through and do your science and figure out what works and what doesn't. So those are, that is kind of what I might call, quote unquote, best channel. We have another question. I'm going to step ourselves back just a little bit to discussion, Jeff, you were having on secured recoveries. The question is on what do you do when equipment is affixed very tightly to a home? So say an HVAC unit or furnace, and can only be sort of recovered in extreme situations. How recoverable are those assets, and how would you approach collections in that scenario?
So from my experience, you're hoping they're homeowners, in which case litigation is about your only way of moving forward with that, because likely being able to enter the house is a near impossibility because they're not going to allow you in. And when you do get the item, it's likely either been used and would be unresellable. So you would have to lead towards litigation and look at putting a writ or a judgment against the property.
Mhm. Yeah, it is very difficult to walk into somebody's basement and pull out their furnace, especially in January. But it ultimately becomes a means by which you, again, behaviorally can have the right and open up discussions with the consumer, or alternatively, to Jeff's point, you're able to attach on to the underlying asset which it is affixed to, with the hopes that someday you will realize on that collateral. But it won't be fast and it won't be cheap. So it's not your ideal situation. Nobody's a winner in that scenario. But the best, in my experience, is to attach to it, hold on, and at the same time try and have a productive conversation with the consumer as to how you can satisfy that debt without having to wait until the very last day. I think I'd like to kind of just while we've got questions coming in, but turn to Colin a little bit, because we've been talking a lot about consumer, but Colin, you deal with small business and commercial loans more regularly. Maybe talk a little bit about how they're different than the consumer space, but also how they're the same, and what collections tactics you would use in those scenarios.
Great, thanks, Brian. So you're right. Most of what we do is in the small and medium-sized business space. There are differences in that we are primarily lending money to corporations, and those corporations are persons under the law. They have rights and they have obligations. We also make sure that we understand that behind the small and medium-sized businesses in this country are people. There is one or two or perhaps three directors who have a vision and a passion for what they're doing, and they stand behind that business. And we need to make sure that they are fully invested with us when they take our money. So we look to have those people secure the debts of their corporation through personal guarantees. And as such, we are not bound by the same rules and regulations that vary from province to province that describe how you can go about collecting money in the consumer space. That issue does not exist for us. So we're able to be much more flexible in how we can interact with people and try to get their attention. And it's really the focus is on the people behind the corporation that we see as the best option or route to see those funds come back to us. That's the biggest difference.
Yeah, and I think the point that behind every company is an individual just sort of emphasizes that although these are distinct strategies, and I think it again resonates to the point that you need to understand the regulatory environment you're operating in. They're different between commercial and consumer. Ultimately, the credit decision is very similar. You're trying to determine a person's income or a company's income generating capability. You're trying to determine collateral. You're trying to determine their overall ability to source funds for you. So it's a similar exercise, but it's not. It's bigger ticket. And I would imagine as well, your collection cycles and your engagement cycles would be longer with a commercial account, particularly a higher balance one, than it would be, say, a small balance credit card account. Would that be sort of a fair description?
Very accurate, Brian. We spend in some cases years working with customers to resolve debts. We utilize the growing information that's available to all lenders through credit reports. Credit reports now show mortgages. They didn't used to show mortgages. Credit reports will now show more and more judgments that have been registered against corporations and the individuals behind them. These tools are incredibly important in helping us understand what the capacity for individuals to meet their obligations for their corporations are. So it's vitally important that we stay attuned to those input data sets, and we use those every single day to try to make the best decisions we can, because litigating is very, very expensive, and we have to be careful about the dry holes. We cannot collect from every single account, unfortunately.
No, No, we've received, thank you, Colin. We've received a couple more questions. So I'm going to try and get through all the ones we've got, but some of them are kind of related together, so I might paraphrase. One that I don't know if this would be probably best for David or Amir, but just about suggestions that the panel would have for obtaining consent for commercial electronic messages for texts in order to stay on side with Canadian anti-spam requirements. So how do you recommend working with customers to get permission to engage with them along their channel of choice?
So I'm going to qualify my answer very quickly. First, by saying I am not a regulatory attorney. Nothing I say should be construed as legal advice. Also, I'm an American, so I'm probably not the best person to offer Canadian advice.
David, I'm just going to interrupt you quickly. I think we're getting a lot of background noise from your line. I don't know if that's just me. I see quizzical faces, so it might be something on your end.
Gotcha. So Amir, why don't you take over for me? I'm going to check my audio.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of anti-spam law, it's good. I used to do that for many years. Anti-spam law, it affects commercial electronic messages mostly for non-established relationships, right? So commercial or marketing relationships. There's an implied consent in law that in collections, you already have a relationship with that consumer, right? So you have an implied consent to communicate with that person via electronic messages. And so that you don't even have to ask their consent prior to do that. But most often in the miscellaneous section or section 13 of the loan agreement, you have a communication clause that allows the company, the creditor, to communicate with you via digital channels, to be able to at least tell you what's going on with your account. So that's the case. So whether it's contractually bound or just via statute, you're allowed to communicate with someone to tell them about their collection, what's going on with their account, without having to require, let's say, an opt-in. So that's the case. And all of our clients that we have, none of them have ever required an opt-in because it's just a relationship that we have. I am a lender, I am a creditor, I am a telco. I'm allowed to communicate with you via digital channels. Now, if you want to go a little bit more communicate via WhatsApp or Facebook, then I would say this is not in statute and you would have to require their consent. But usually via email or even text message, this is already allowed.
So, and Amir, I do apologize for making you use your law degree.
Yeah, I'll send you guys a bill. Don't worry about it.
So, but you know, it was useful to have sort of expert on the panel, and if you could maybe expand on it specifically. And David, I think you're probably up and running. We'll just continue with Amir for a second, and then kick over to you for also your thoughts. But expand a little bit on not just communication, but also payment channel preference for consumers. So this is something that Lexop does pretty deeply. How is it that you would ensure that you're dealing with consumers in the channels that they want, but also the payment channels that they want on your side?
Well, we noticed, right? So you can ask the question, right? We see our clients usually know which method they can communicate with their clients, whether it's email or SMS. But something that we noticed is that consumers are very reluctant to click in a link in an SMS, right? It actually takes away from the legitimacy of the process. So we actually stopped doing that. We use SMS, let's say, in tandem with email so that you can get that omni-channel, catching the person's attention in an omni-channel way. So in terms of preference, what we noticed also is that we did a survey recently with, again, the same survey that we do every year. And we noticed that while a big portion of the demographic used to like to solve their account, again, the traditional way, via phone or in person, now, because especially with COVID, there's a massive preference towards digital, right? So contactless paying, right? Being able to pay online directly, or even going via email or text message for the engagement. There's still a portion of the population, especially I would say the more complex accounts, that you have to go engage via more traditional ways. But more and more, we notice that 76% of the population actually prefers to be engaged via email or SMS. That's huge, right? And that's their preference for engagement. And then there's preference for payment. How would you like to pay, right? And that's another question.
Well, and this does connect to another question we received, which is how do you then deal with some of these sort of low friction contact points? So text and email, can people not just delete those and move on? Are those actually sort of effective channels? Is maybe how I paraphrase the question. And David, why don't we give you a test and see if you're back?
I'm hoping you can hear me now.
Very perfectly, crystal clear.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very nice. So, yes, I mean, so in theory, could folks simply delete the text or SMS, text or email? Yes. They could simply not answer a phone call as well. I think the thing to think about is what is going to be most relevant to them and what is going to most encourage the call to action that you want or the outcome that you want from that call to action. Often, it's far easier to control the tone and message in a consistent way through an email or an SMS versus through the voice of a collector. And so I think many times you actually yield a far better collections result. In fact, we have one client that stopped all outbound calling and collections and did not see a degradation in performance. They actually saw an increase in collections performance. So I think you've just got to recognize how to do it effectively, and you can in fact yield stronger results. And you can also use it in accord with phone calls, as I think we've said earlier. It's not one or the other. It's knowing when to utilize a specific technique to drive a result.
Yeah, it's been my experience. We find it's age specific. Usually around the 50 years old, they're more accustomed to like a telephone letter campaign. Younger generation don't answer the phone. You have to send them by text, email. If you don't have an omni-channel or a website or some sort of place that they can talk to you online, you can't get a hold of them. So yeah.
Jeff, that was the perfect setup for my next question, which is how do you segment down these customers to know? So what is it? What metrics? How do you think about breaking these down and then trying to test what channels against them? And you mentioned one, age specific. Are there others? Maybe you can expand on it. Yeah.
So age, we also have seen some changes from a provincial perspective, language preference as well. A lot of those situations are how we start the initial segmentation. Then what our true segmentation is what the results we get. We're able to identify if customers prefer to speak to us through Facebook Messenger, Instagram, all these different omni-channel experiences. We've been able to do the analytics around it, and that's our first option to attempt to contact them. Not to say that we don't use the other ones, but their first attempt to contact is on the system that they've previously spoken to us on, and we've had success with. It's not that we stop the other ones, because we do want to get a hold of the customer, but it's the first one we go to.
Right. And we've received a question on live chat as well. Using sort of the online live chat website pop-up feature. Is that something that that you've used, and what type of success rate? And that's again a question for anybody.
I've used it. I've had success with it. It's part of the tool you have for your website, and customers are used to seeing it, so they expect to see something pop up. So yeah, we've had success with it. It's one of the tools we use.
And similarly, I think the point is right. It's one of those options in the toolbox. It's not the only one. It is often an appealing one for people to be able to communicate with you in a way that ensures that they feel like they've got a degree of anonymity, especially for a first contact point. People who are in early stage delinquency or even late stage delinquency, who aren't accustomed to being in that position, they've had some sort of a life event that has forced them there. They are very nervous about reaching out to their creditors and telling them. It's embarrassing to tell them that they're having problems making their payments. And so any type of channel that enables them to maintain a degree of anonymity, but still get the questions answered that they're looking for, is always going to be very desirable. And an online chat one is a way to do that, even more so than some of the messenger options and text options, because it's clear who that is coming from. So I think it's, again, right tool for the right type of interaction. If you're having a negotiation on what you're going to settle something for, chat is probably not the best way to do it. So it really is that right piece and that right approach.
And you can pivot from chat to, you know what, we seem to have an agreement. I just need to quickly speak to you to make sure I'm speaking to the right person, validate certain piece of information, send you an email, and use all your different methods of communication to get the results you're looking for.
Great point, right? And that's that's the whole omni-channel philosophy, is that it's not one channel for the entire entire communication with a counterparty. It can jump from channel to channel. We are running low on time. I do want to make sure we have more questions. I do want to, David, maybe turn a couple of questions over to you, because I think one of the areas that you guys do a lot of work in is using data and how big data and how technology has disrupted the industry over the past, even just, I would used to say 10 years, but now it's 2 years, 3 years. And what will it look like in the next couple of years, couple of decade or less?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. So, think about all of the data that you can gather from interactions with customers, and it's not just successful interactions. So if you think about digital interactions, email, SMS, other channels, right? One of the things that we do is kind of frictionlessly direct people back to like landing pages, for example, where there are a variety of options for them to, basically choose certain offers, provide certain pieces of data back specific to their situation, things of that nature. All of that data is hugely valuable. So for example, we've treated over 30 million consumers to date, right? And what that data does is you can kind of aggregate a lot of information and be able to determine from an optimization standpoint what is going to be the next best kind of offer to make, or the next best way with which to communicate to somebody, or the best tone to take in that communication, or should it be an email, should it be an SMS? Those are all things that now you can gather information very quickly. You can do a lot of A/B testing kind of at scale very quickly, and then you can change things dynamically. And that's really something that's kind of happened from an engagement standpoint in the past couple of years. It'll only become more powerful the more data that you kind of gather through a platform, and then make that data available to different parts of your organization. So earlier we were talking about, hey, the best way to prevent collections is to originate basically accounts that don't go into collections, right? So think about the data that you're getting from an interaction standpoint. It's hugely valuable. People that you presume are risky for a certain reason based on credit data, a variety of attributes that you might create at the origination stage from a modeling perspective, you can learn something different about them during the collections process and learn that if they're treated a certain way, they're not as risky as you perceive. If you can then take that data and feed it back into the origination side of the business, into those modeling techniques, you can continuously improve the performance of portfolios, kind of expand the universe a little bit on who you're willing to underwrite without actually increasing the amount of accounts in collections. That has all been made easier through technology and through the aggregation of data. I think that will become more powerful over time, because there's only so many ways to expand the universe to increase the size of your underwriting business, right? There's only so many alternative data sets that you could buy from a credit bureau or some other provider. At some point, you're going to need to utilize your own technology to gather and kind of create those data assets yourself. And I think that's the direction things are going.
David, I think that's going to be pretty close to our closing question for the day. But it does, I think, lend me into, the opportunity to turn it back to the panelists for some final thoughts, and then we'll turn it back to the CLA to close us off. But I would say, just from my own perspective, if there's one thing that I think people can take away from this that is most critical, it's to make sure you focus on the things you're good at, and for the things that you can't be good at or can't build at scale, turn to your partners, turn to your colleagues within the CLA, within other industries who have built those things already for the purpose of serving your industry. I think you would find that on a aggregated basis, if you were to take all of the different entities and all of the different thought leaders that we've got across this organization and aggregate them up, it is as powerful an entity as any large enterprise would be. And there's a lot of brain power and a lot of entrepreneurialness out there that can be leveraged in very exciting ways. So I'm going to go reverse from what we started off, and Jeff, allow you to kind of give some your closing thoughts, and then we'll go through David, Colin, and then Amir gets the last word this time, and then we'll turn it back to the CLA.
Yeah, I just at first I'd like to thank yourself for hosting this, as well as the CLA for inviting me. I think we've given some good insights on what each one of us are doing and how different experts in different fields can provide support from your collections and repayment or loss mitigation strategies. And the continuing evolving of what's going on means being agile and quick to adapt is very important.
David, over to you.
Sure, quickly, since I took the last question there and probably took too long to answer it. So yes, thank you very much to the CLA for allowing me to participate in this. It's been great, and again, I appreciate it. The only thing I would quickly say is a lot of collection strategy and a lot of our answers have been very inward looking. Have you improved segmentation? Have you improved certain things within your organization? I would suggest to everybody that they take a moment to look outward, right, to their consumers and the impact that the strategies have on the consumer. Because if you can minimize the impact and make your kind of interactions with consumers more empathetic, you will naturally get a better collections result, and you'll have a better kind of corporate culture because of it as well.
Colin.
Again, thanks for having me, and great job as always, Brian. I think something that David has on his webpage, cement.com, is fundamentally the foundation for how we try to do our business today in collecting money and how we'll do it tomorrow. And that's empathy. It's about understanding to the ability that we can, the situation that that person, that company is facing, the situation they find themselves in, and we have to find a way to work collaboratively with that person to make an outcome we can both live with. And if we do that with empathy and we do that with respect, we will see our results exceed all of our key result area requirements. There's just no doubt about it. Empathy is what it's all about. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Colin. And Amir.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks to the panel, CLA, Brian, great moderation. Bravo. I have to give it to you. I'll echo what Colin just said, right? Something we prone on Lextop is that if somebody's late, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're absolutely delinquent on, and in terms of a payer, they're not just a lack of responsibility and cares, because something has happened, right? Quite often something has happened. Maybe they're experiencing financial difficulty. Maybe they've moved and they're not receiving those traditional letters at home anymore. They're not engaged the right way. So understanding what's going on and adapting to new habits, consumer habits, I think it's key in terms of what the future holds. Because you have to, in order to improve collection, you have to understand what the problem is. If you don't know what the problem is, you'll never be able to polish it. So that's the future that I think that's the focus should be. And that's it. Thank you for your time, everybody.
Thank you to all the panelists, and as well, thank you to the CLA. So I think we've still got Danielle there to jump on in and close us off. But if there's anything else anybody else has, let us know. I do as well. Just want to sort of echo the comments everybody else has made. I think it's a really interesting time. There's been a bit of a changing of the guard, I would say, within the collections industry over the past 10 years, not only in this industries, but in others. And I think the consumers are sort of are reacting to it. So we're seeing that, and just the pure fact that when there was stimulus injected into the economy, that we saw people pay their debts tells us that people want to pay their debts. They just need the ability, they need the channels, they need the messaging to do so. And these gentlemen and ladies have those solutions. So please turn to them. So over to you, please.
Yeah, I just want to quickly say thank you to all of you, our panelists, for all of your incredible insight, and of course to Brian for moderating such a great discussion. And also I want to say a huge thank you to our sponsor, Lexop, for making this panel possible. And of course, to everyone who tuned in and submitted great questions. It was a really active and dynamic panel, thanks to all of the questions that were submitted. So thank you. And we continue to invite everyone to become a member of the CLA and attend our upcoming events. You can find them at lendersevents.com. And of course, we will be emailing out a recording of this session if you want to watch it again. So thank you all for your time and for attending today, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.